Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast.
Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. You're sitting down today with Pat Basil. Coach Basil is a strength coach working to help coaches that wear multiple hats program their weight room. Before stepping out on his own, he was at Hamilton College as the head strength and conditioning coach. Before that, he was at Bryant University as the school's assistant strength and conditioning coach. While he was there, he worked with multiple programs: field hockey, men's soccer, men and women's swimming and diving, men's golf teams, and he assisted with football, baseball, basketball, and men and women's lacrosse teams. He also served as the head strength conditioning coach and assistant football coach at SUNY Maritime College. He is a certified strength conditioning specialist by the National Strength and Conditioning Association, and he has his USAW and Reflexive Performance Reset Level 1 certifications. He has a bachelor's degree in applied psychology from Bryant and his master's in exercise science with a concentration in sports performance training from Concordia University in Chicago. Welcome to the show, Coach.
Happy to be here.
So, a psychology degree. Were you thinking? I know a lot of coaches have that. Were you thinking about moving into straight sport coaching, or strength conditioning always been the avenue you wanted?
Yeah, that's pretty much been the avenue I knew I wanted to do. That's the funny part about it is I have an interesting relationship with academia. Me and school never got along. So for those who don't know, Bryant, where I went to undergrad, Bryant University in Rhode Island, is a business school through and through. It's a well-known business school. I went there to play football. I had no interest in doing business. And the reason I was a psychology major is because if you were a liberal arts major, you didn't have to take a second level finance, accounting, math. So I was like, I'm not taking those. That's not going to go well. So I have to be liberal arts. And it was either that or communication or sociology, one of those. And psychology seemed to be the most interesting of the bunch. So I picked that. And that's kind of sums up my whole academic career. So I was a psychology major for that reason.
Do you find it helps? I mean, you could have went either way, and had it been helpful, the math I'm sure would be helpful in all the programming and analytics you do. But then psychology, you're kind of breaking into what the public may think, and be able to navigate that a little easier.
It's a lot of theoretical you learn in college. When you tap into things like motivation, that's more so dealing with people and less, I guess, the use of psychology. And to be honest with you, I didn't really pay attention very much in school, so it wouldn't be fair to say it doesn't translate. That wouldn't be very fair to them. That's the long and short of that.
Hey, it's an honest answer. I mean, you could have beat around the bush, but you were there to play football, and that's what you did. Yep. So stepping out on your own, you've left the college setting, the athletes, the weight rooms. I mean, watching some of your videos and stuff like that, that was a passion of yours. So now that you're on your own, do you find that you miss that setting?
It's so new. And to answer the question right now, no, I don't. Because toward the end, the last 2 years at Hamilton, it was just me. So 650 athletes and just me. So I do not mind the break, to be honest with you. I do. So why do we like to coach? Why do we like to give back? It's about making a difference, right? It's about helping people. We do it directly with athletes. I do the same thing now with coaches, who then go on to serve their athletes. So I scratch that itch in another way now. So I'm still out helping people and making their lives better, just in a different way, from a more educational, type of role instead of directly hands-on coaching. So I still get that. Maybe if I didn't have that, I'd have a different answer. But right now, I mean, we're only a month removed from it. So right now, I don't mind the break of not being, on the floor for 10, 12 hours, all that. And I still get to make a difference and help in reality, a much bigger scale. Because if I can help one coach, he's got 40, 50 kids. Okay, if I can help 10 coaches, that's now 400, 500 kids I can help and make an impact on. So I still get that in some way.
Now, with rooms that big and that much time on the floor, I mean, you're bringing the initial energy, and then you hope that the room picks that up and kind of carries it so you don't have to provide all that. How were you able to motivate athletes to kind of pick up that slack so it didn't just wear you down?
That's a good question. So in the Division III level, for those who aren't familiar, in the off season, it's 100% optional. Well, you could take attendance at some other places, but our conference is called the NESCAC, the Northeast Small College Athletic Conference. Ultra high academic, but super hands off athletics in the off season. So we couldn't take attendance. We couldn't tell the coaches. Like if the coaches walked by the weight room a little too slowly, they would get called to the principal's office. Super hands off. The benefit to that is when you have kids that are in there, they truly, hand to God, want to be there. So I didn't really have to motivate them a ton because the ones who really didn't want to be there weren't there because they knew there was no consequence and nobody could do anything about it. And honestly, after about a year of trying to fight that fight, I just gave up on it. You can't teach a pig to sing. It doesn't work and it annoys the pig. So I said, you know what? I'm going to rock and roll with the top 75% because there's always going to be 25% of warriors. They're going to be there hell or high water, right? The middle 50%, they may not love it, but they understand it's important. If they want to be good or they want to be, at least keep up with their teammates, they got to do it. And then there's going to be the bottom 25% that they don't want help. You cannot help somebody that does not want help. That's a hard lesson I learned early on. So that bottom 25% that needed a kick in the butt, I couldn't. Just by the rules and by the structure, I wasn't allowed to, so I didn't. And you know what? There's nothing you could say to those kids anyway. If they made the choice, they're not going to be there. So what you were left with was a room full of kids that truly, hand to God, wanted to be there. And that the energy feeds itself. When you have a group of people that are working hard and going through the struggle together, you lift each other up. So I didn't necessarily have to. Also, it ties into my amount of volume I do. So my workouts were like 30 to 40 minutes, kind of at most. If we went 45 minutes, it was too long. So they knew, okay, I could wrap my head around this for 35 minutes. I'm going to get after it, and I hit that peak of volume, and we shut it down. So I didn't do a ton of like finishers or like harder conditioning after. They knew it was going to be good work, high energy, get out. So they knew when they come in, I wasn't about running them into the ground, so they could keep their energy up and be excited, and they knew what it was. Also, behind that, I had groups every 45 minutes, so it could only go so long from a logistics standpoint. So you got a room full of kids that want to be there, or at least value it. They know I'm not going to crush them with volume because that's not my forte. And you got a positive atmosphere on top of all that. They didn't really need to be motivated. Give them a taste of the result, and once they get in there, if they've never listened before, in the right team atmosphere, the energy feeds on itself. When you struggle with that is when you have teams that aren't serious, but they had to be there, say, in season. And at that point, that kind of goes back to that bottom 25%. They were there because they had to, and then you can only motivate them so much. You coach them up, you get them through it. My mantra for them was never negative. So don't give them a bad attitude. Don't cross your arms and complain about it. Just coach them up like you normally would. They'll come in, they'll try at 70%, and then they'll leave. And when the season's over, you'll never see them again, and that's okay. And that's the way some of them go at the small school and at high school level. Those are in there too. So that's how I handle all that.
Man, there's a lot you covered in there to kind of talk about. But do you find that a weight room that has no pressure for the athletes to be there really keeps your finger on the pulse of where that team is? I mean, you can obviously see your workers, you can obviously see your leaders. When maybe they're falling off a little and how that's going to affect the team. Oh,
hell yeah. Yeah, our best teams were in there. For example, most recently our men's basketball team won the conference championship February of this year. Those guys are in there extra. So they would lift 3 days a week, and they started doing 4 just because guys kept coming in, hey, coach, do you have another day? Do you have another day? So I just gave them 4 days. We would do 3 as a group, and then they would just do a 4th on their own, which became a regular thing. So the ones who were serious, our best teams, was not a question. They were there, and they were getting after it. Our women's hockey team was another one, just absolute warriors. They made it to the Frozen Four, so they were, a game away from a national championship. They were national semifinals. I never once had to tell them to show up. Didn't happen. Their captains handled it. Their coaches were on top of it. Men's hockey was another one. And there's plenty of others. I'm not singling out any other. But there were plenty others that were like that. So yeah, our best teams, our most winning teams, never a question. And it's no surprise. Our teams that weren't very successful, they was either lackluster or they would miss or the coaches wouldn't hold them accountable. It was pretty common sense. You could see who was, okay, this team doesn't try very hard or they're lackluster with showing up. Their record reflected that. You could pretty much see it. So to answer your question, hell yeah, it was a high indicator of how well the team performed. It goes back to culture, right? And attitude and how much they value work and winning, and it all shows up in the weight room.
Yeah, I mean, I think by it not being mandatory, maybe you may have learned a lot more as a coach about the players and how to coach it than if they had made it mandatory. Plus, the room's not getting drugged down with 25% of the kids just not athletes, just not wanting to be there, because that middle part might go either way. It could move to the top of the room, or with the right, I guess, distraction, it could be pulled to the bottom. So maybe you're getting more bang for the buck by having it voluntary.
100%, because I've seen that. I've seen mediocre cultures. You're one or two bad eggs, it'll rot your team from the inside out. When I was playing, we had 1 or 2 years like that, where some lackluster guys got the ear of the locker room, and you had that kind of middle ground and dragged them down, and it rots your team from the inside out. So you're right there. But those ones who don't want to be there, you kind of weed those out by default. Or the ones who are like that, they quit at our level because you know what, these kids are really committed. That's not what I want to do. This isn't for me, and they would just find the door on their own. So you'd get that too.
Yeah, you're getting some kids there that have worked their entire life to play at that level, and they're coming in fairly burnt out, and then they don't really want to do it, but that was their identity. Now it's time for them to move on in life, so I'm sure you have to deal with some of that.
Yeah, it would come up. Sometimes you could see it. I call it the quitter's eye, when they just have that glossed over look and they're just showing up. You could kind of see it sometimes. For the most part, they would wait till after the season, so I didn't deal with it a ton. They would show up, do it, and then just kind of not show up again one day. But I didn't directly deal with a ton of that.
Now, when you started getting into the season and teams were kind of mandated to be there, like you said, some of the energy isn't brought. They're just there because they have to be. They're just buying their time. How were you able to keep yourself positive moving forward, not let that drag you down? Because I could see where it could turn into a grind really quickly. You're just trying to push a bicycle through mud, essentially.
That's a good way to put it. Luckily, I didn't have to deal with a ton of those. Most of our teams were in that kind of higher level where they at least understood it and valued it, even if they didn't love it. Although the overwhelming majority did value it, did want to be there, and did a good job. Did a really good job. But there were a handful that just didn't. I used to get, when I was younger, so I got to Hamilton when I was 26. When I was younger, I took it a little personally. Not that they weren't trying, but I would sit there and say, this is literally a waste of my time. Like, they're not trying. I could have another team in here. But frankly, as I went on, I realized I was pretty immature, and I am getting a paycheck. So it was, you know what? It's my job to coach them. If they don't want to be here and they don't want to try, that's on them. That's on them, but it's my job to still show up and be like a professional about it. Have good energy, coach them up, try to keep myself positive. You do have to be more conscious of it. Like, if you have a good group, you feed off that energy naturally, right? Mm-hmm. With those other groups, you have to make a little more conscious effort to be positive. But in that time, that's what I'm getting paid to do. So I did that. And it was, like I said, never negative, positive coaching. Hey, good job. I know I'm never going to see you again until next year, but I didn't say that to him. But it was, hey, cue this, chest up, back flat, whatever it was. Just coach them like you normally would. All right, guys, nice work. See you Thursday. And at a certain point, Thursday didn't come anymore, and it was like, all right, see you next year. And it's part of the job. Part of the job.
Now, you worked at some pretty high academic schools. So you're working with a pretty analytical athlete. I keep saying athlete. Working with them, that's a little bit different of a skill set. So how were you able to navigate that from maybe your just typical university that didn't have the academic standards that some of these schools had?
It was really different at Hamilton. So Bryant's a good school, but it's still Division I. They understood I'm here for a job. You listen to what the coach says, and it was like I didn't have to worry about that as much. Hamilton. So for those who don't understand, Hamilton's like a 1,500 SAT might not get you in. It's like Ivy League caliber school. So like we've had kids that have perfect ACT scores, like ultra high level smart kids. You would get a lot of questions. So there would be a lot of, like you said, they want to know the why more. They would ask questions, and it was common for kids to think they knew more than they did. Because they would see, especially now in the rise of social media. And I think that the further I got into it, my time there, I think the little worse it got. They would see something on TikTok and Instagram, and they'd watch a YouTube video, and they think they have it all figured out. I found that kind of came more with those mediocre teams. The teams who were really bought in and really got after it, they just listened and they did it. And when you gave them the why, they understood. And maybe they'd ask a question or two, but it was a genuine. So I did find that they would ask some questions because they're naturally inquisitive, which is good. I love when they did that because, one, it's fun to talk shop a little bit. But anytime you can give them a deeper understanding, it helps them understand why they're doing it, why it benefits them. But it helps them to, like, it gives you a chance to prove your competence. Like, oh, wow, this guy actually knows his stuff. It's not just stuff. He's not just putting exercises on the paper. So it's a chance to, like, show them, you're in your position for a reason. And it goes back to building a relationship. Take a few minutes to have a conversation with a kid, like a genuine, like, here's why we do this. I think that goes a long way. So the good with the bad, you'd get some kids that thought they knew better, and you get some that truly wanted to learn and wanted to have a discussion about it because they were genuinely curious. More positive than negative. But I still saw, I would say, more of the negative than I've seen anywhere else. And maybe some of that came with just years and, I don't know, the rise of social media, whatever you want to call it. So maybe it was somewhat tied in there.
I wondered on that. I figured I would ask that question just because I've had analytical kids over the years, and then trying to help them through, they just think about things way different. So finding that common ground between what a weight room is and getting them to understand what you need, I could see how that could cause some struggles. Now, I know you work in some small rooms, and this is some of the stuff I've heard you talk about that's super interesting because we have a small room here, so I can understand. But the flow of the room and how to get as much equipment in there as possible, but set it up, and then also at the same time teaching kids that, hey, if a piece of equipment's open, get in there and get your work done, and we'll keep the room moving. How were you able to do that at some of those places?
That's a good question. So in contrast, so each step of the way, so I interned at UConn when I first got out of college, big FBS weight room, they had the turf attached. And then Bryant, when I first got back, and this is what it was when I played there, we had a basement weight room with, like, when I played, we had 5 racks, probably 4 platforms. So I learned how to do cleans and whatnot on carpet with duct tape. There's runs in the carpets, they put duct tape down. At Maritime, it was the student gym. Sometimes you had it to ourselves, sometimes it was overrun by regular kids. Then Bryant, when I went back, they refurbished it, brand new building, 10,000 square feet, 20-something racks. And then Hamilton was a converted academic building into like a fitness center, and it was outfitted by like a commercial fitness outfitter, and it wasn't designed by a strength coach. So I've kind of been all over the map. I've had indoor turf in like the world, and I've VBT, Tendo units, and I've had like commercial gym stuff. So like I've been all over the map. So speaking of what I did at Hamilton, because I think it most represents what most see, and this ties into what I did at Maritime a little bit. Toward the end, most of my programming was done in tri-sets. And it would be something I could do on the racks with like a barbell, because our racks were on one side of the room. On the other side of the room was the dumbbell area, was the line of dumbbells, and then just space in the middle. So for the most part, it was something on the racks, something on the dumbbells, and then something in the middle that could be done anywhere. So an example would be like front squat. I'm on the rack. I'd pair that with like a dumbbell incline bench on the dumbbell side, and in between you do like box jumps. I'd set up 3-4 boxes. Boom. So they would go squat, jump, press, squat, jump, press. Not necessarily in that order. It would be go. My cue to them would be when it's open, hop on. If you're standing around, you're wrong. So to start, you'd get a little bit of like herding sheep, but after like I'd say 2-3 weeks, the first 4 weeks I noticed. Once you get through the first 4 weeks, they understand the flow of a session and the flow of the room, and it runs itself, which is kind of nice. So triceps were the way I did it in that way to keep them moving around the room. We were pretty good equipment-wise. We had a pretty decent amount of dumbbells, barbells at each rack, but still the space was at a premium. And I'm still having. I would gym as many as I reasonably could, so I would see groups of like 30 to 40-ish, probably sometimes more. A lot of times that was more than one team. So I'd take like a team of 20 and like a team of 15 would train together but on opposite sides of the room. So it's like sometimes they'd be in season and off season at the same time. So they'd have their program, they had their program, and it's just kind of two things constantly moving, and you just got to get around the room and let them operate. Another thing I would do in programming to maximize that efficiency was keep things really similar. So I would work almost exclusively on 4-week blocks, because you teach them to it in week 1, they get better at it week 2, and they are self-sufficient in weeks 3 and 4. And if you keep a small rotation of exercises, they've done it before. They know how to do it. If they've been in your program a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, those sophomores, juniors, and seniors know everything you're going to throw at them. So on the downside, it might get a little redundant, but it's still brutally effective. Like I'm sure you and I have been doing dumbbell rows for a combined 100 years, right? It still works. And that was part of my message to them is like, you know what? We only have barbells and dumbbells, and you know what? It works anyway. So it's developing the familiarity, the skill, the mastery, and by getting better at fewer things, they were able to perform it better. I think they got better training gains out of it, but it also tied back into flow around the room and that logistical efficiency, because they knew what to do. If nothing else, they could just see it. Okay, dumbbell row on the sheet, I know what that is, I can go. I've done that before, I know how much weight to do, I can just go. And that really helped. So I think that ties into the length of my lifts too. So when I say I did like 35, 40-minute workouts, it's not that I'm doing less or I'm trying to do minimal. That's not what I'm trying to do. It's just that it was so efficient from a traffic standpoint. I would shave off minutes, a 45-minute lift would turn into like a 38-minute lift, just because they knew what to do and efficiently they would move around the room. So just by programming traffic-wise, we were able to save time. So that's how I made it fit.
And that was a question I had in there on efficiency. How long did it kind of take you to narrow that down to get stuff where it was really moving well? So, I mean, I would imagine your first few years going into that space, small space, getting to know the athletes, it could be overwhelming. By the time you left, I'm sure you had it like clockwork. But how much time did it kind of take in the beginning to figure out what you wanted?
I'd say each year I was still finding ways to shave off something or other. So it was, and I would say probably 4.5 years. I would say this past year I got my typical workout template down to the point where it was like fine-tuned and like, this is my masterpiece. And I actually got to run the masterpiece with a couple of teams for a year. So I would say, man, 4 years to really get it to the point where it was at the end. And if I had stuck with it, I probably would have found more ways to fine-tune it. But yeah, to come up with like the tricep and programming around the room, I'd say at least that first year, because I work predominantly in supersets just because I had the room. And there's nothing wrong with that. Supersets are great, and I did use those too. But I'd say like a year or two to really start to understand how the flow of the room went and where I could shave time off. A lot of it was by necessity, because we had more teams that wanted to get in on a team. So here's another thing. We could only have groups assigned from 7 to 9 a.m. and then from 4 to 7 p.m. We couldn't have anything during the day. That was a conference and school rule. So every team wanted a time from 4 to 7. Not many wanted to get up in the mornings, although we filled those hours. So in order to make more time slots, I had to basically not shorten lifts, but find ways to make so I can cut out more 45-minute chunks. And toward the end of the year, that's toward the end of my run, that's what it was. It was like a 4 to 4:30. That was typically in-season teams. Then it was like a 4:30 to 5:15, 5:15 to 6, 6 to 6, so on and so forth. So it became like, okay, I have 45 minutes and I have a hard cap because there's another team in the hallway waiting. So it just over time, I figured out ways where the traffic jams were and where traffic started to build up. And I would just remember that next time I went to program. So you'd kind of see it and like trial and error a little bit. You'd kind of learn by seeing where it backed up and then just making sure I didn't do that. For example, one thing I noticed, your unilateral stuff is going to take twice as long. So I would limit my unilateral stuff to 1 per day just because it took more time. I would do where I could get away with 2 sets instead of 3 sets, I would do it. Like if I could do, why do 3 sets of 10 when I could do 2 sets of 15? Or hell, some things are 1 by 20. Just take it to a 20, 22 rep max and be done with it. It's 2 fewer sets we have to do. And if we're talking about beginner, intermediate training level kids, it doesn't matter. If you're pushing some strain around 20 to 30 total reps, with a less than 2 reps in reserve, you're fine. And it really doesn't. And I at a certain point, I just didn't have time to overthink it. It was, okay, you got your strain, you got your 20, 30 reps, move on. Next group, you're in. Especially when I lost my last assistant and I was by myself. It's like, okay, you got your strain, you got your reps, good. You guys are done. Next group, bring it in. And it was like churn through. And I realized that actually worked really well. So that's how it all kind of came to fruition organically over the years.
Now, you talked about losing your assistant, and it was just you, and you're talking about an immense amount of athletes. So creating the culture where upperclassmen kind of start taking the lead, and they can start helping the underclassmen, they can start keeping the flow going how you want it. That takes time, that takes buy-in. How were you able to create that?
One results. At that point, by the time they were in the program for 2, 3 years, they understood if they were in there and they put the work in, it showed, and they would get results. So all the hype speeches and all the explanations in the world are great, but if you don't put your money where your mouth is, get them stronger, faster, more powerful, you earn their trust because you did your job. But yeah, it took a while, especially that first year. They were used to doing things a different way, and it took, I would say, that first full year and probably into that second year where they really understood, okay, this is how we're going to do things, this is the new way, here's a year of training results. So it does take some time. There's no way to rush that process. And I get that same question from people who are taking over new situations, especially startup programs. It's like they take it personal. It's like they're not bought in the first 3 months. Like they're not gonna be, and they're not gonna be for the first year and a half, 2 years. You kind of have to let the old guard graduate because they've been doing a certain way for 3 years, and you got this whole new radical thing. Change takes time. Change takes time. But then if you keep showing up and doing your job and giving them a good experience and giving them results, you're going to earn that buy-in over time. So time is money. So instead of money, they're paying you with time and effort. Well, they better get a return. If you give them a return, you'll come back. It's the same reason you would buy anything else. If you get results and you get a good service, you'll come back and buy more. Same as anything else. So it's not about hype speeches. It's not about rah-rah. It's not about, here's why we do it, although that's a little bit of it short. It's about results. So you do your job and provide results, take care of itself.
So now with what you're doing, you deal with a lot of high school coaches, small college coaches. Mm-hmm. A lot of those coaches get thrown into a situation. So you're trying to help them navigate exactly what you're talking about, managing the time, understanding it's going to take time. What is the best advice you have for a coach like that?
Keep it simple. Keep it simple. Keep it simple and do less. There's 2 things you see a lot of. It's that one is more is better. Because everybody has done like the marathon workouts, 20 exercises. I want these kids crawling out of the weight room on their hands and knees, and that old school mentality. So one, do less. And I try to put out as many like hard guidelines as I can. Like I always say, 6 to 8 total exercises, 20 to 25 total sets. So that way, even if they kind of do it wrong, you can only do so much wrong in 25 total sets. And honestly, when I program, that's what it came out to anyway. When I draw up case studies, it's about 20 to 22 total sets across, 2 trisets, that's 6 exercises. I found that to be really effective. We just didn't need more. So one, do less. It's not that less is more. It's that more isn't any better. It's a sharp bell curve of volume. So one, do less. 2, keep it simple. You don't need to do like these fancy DBT or like fancy exercises or floating heel this or that or triphasic or west side or bands and chains and whatever the flavor of the month is, right? And all that stuff has a place. And I understand when to use it, how to use it. But I go back to your big rocks in training, right? What are your fundamental core things, your bilateral, your hinge, your push, your pulls, things that have stood the test of time? The flavor of the week, the fads are going to come and go, all right? For now, ignore all that because it's going to be out of season in 6 months anyway. But stick to the fundamental things that work. And here's a proven template. Here's 6 exercises, 20 sets. Keep it simple and get really, really good at a few things. And that will get you off the ground. I mean, hell, you can make an entire program out of that. I did with 29 teams. But just to get off the ground. Now, if you want to do more in time, awesome, go for it. But just to get off the ground, keep it simple, do less, and get really, really good and really, really consistent at a handful of things. And that will get you started. If you're a football coach, install your base plays, right? Install your base protections. Because I have a lot of football coaches I work with. You're not going to throw the whole playbook at them on day one, are you? You're doing those basic stuff. You got to get through it. And maybe as the season goes on, you might install 1 or 2 more things as you go. But get really good at your base stuff. You ask any coordinator, they have the meat and potatoes of their system for a reason. Well, the same thing goes in the weight room. So that's the key message to them.
Now, I've watched some of your stuff on Instagram and YouTube kind of explaining quadrant programming. Mm-hmm. Now, that seems like a really simple way to break down a weight room and get things heading in the right direction. How were you able to kind of come up with that?
That's just something I noticed. It's something I noticed that I did when I was putting together a program. So for the most part, I trained in total body. So we would go like 2-3 days a week, total body for most teams far and away. And I noticed when I was putting them together, okay, total body upper and lower, and you need posterior and anterior. So that's just what made sense to me. And I noticed it became like a graph, lower, upper, anterior, posterior. So you get one of each. Lower anterior, lower posterior, upper anterior, upper posterior. And I realized it was kind of like a chart, whatever you would call that. And I remember teaching my next assistant, who I also transitioned to another role in the department, so I didn't have him long, but he was basically new. It was his first job. So I think I was teaching him like how I put together a single workout, a single template, and I may have even drawn it up without thinking about it. And it's like a template. So that's where I got the idea. It's a quadrant. You just pick the major, because that's what it is. It's movement-based stuff. So you can plug in whatever exercise you want. It's still a lower body anterior movement is going to be like a squat or a lunge. So it doesn't exactly matter what you do, as long as it fits the group. It could be a front squat, it could be a back squat, it could be a goblet squat, it could be a split squat. As long as you hit that, 3 days a week, you do a different one, you're fine. It's a really way to, and that's why I talk about a programming system. So it's not just putting individual workouts on the board. It's, okay, I'm going to hit these movements every day. That's 3 days a week. I'm going to do this 3 times in a week. Each day, I'm going to have a different variation of the same movement. So let's say an upper body posterior. That's going to be a row or a chin up. Okay, so I need 3 of those. I need, let's say, a dumbbell row, a chin up, and a barbell row. Pick something. Doesn't matter. So there's boom, boom, boom. That's 3 days of programming. Okay, now I take that and I progress the sets and reps over 4 weeks. 3 sets of 8 for 2 weeks and 3 sets of 10. Okay, that's a month of training done like that. And I realized you take that month, the next month you swap out for 3 new variations, that's 8 weeks. 3 new variations, that's 12 weeks. And you know what? In that 4th block, I would just go back to week 1, and that's 16 weeks of training like that. And if you keep a small rotation of things, again, it ties back to the mastery. They get really good at those things. So, but it's all plugging in the movement that works for that group. So you can use the same template So let's say I had an advanced team. That lower anterior might be like a speed squat with chains. Whatever, I'm going dynamic effort because they're already strong. Whereas a beginner might do like a goblet squat. It's the same template. So if we took it the same template, let's say lower anterior, lower posterior, speed squat, goblet squat, posterior barbell RDLs, back extensions unloaded, and upper a press like push press with a barbell, dumbbell bench press with the 10 pounders. Pull would be like weighted chin ups, and on the other side would be TRX rows. So it's the same template, two grossly different training levels and training needs, right? Let's say over here we have like 24-year-old hockey players, and over here we have like a golfer who's never lifted weights in his life. Same template, same program, not the same program, but the same template, and you just plug in variations that work for the different training levels. And that's how I was able to program for so many teams, is because it's the same template. You just program to the training level, your advanced, intermediates, and beginners. And then I'm kind of rambling here, but this is how it unfolds. You bucket them into groups. They're beginners, intermediates, or advanced. So if the majority of your teams are intermediates, they can all do the same program. You just have like a base level intermediate program. All right, great. Let's say women's basketball and softball are both intermediate training levels. Okay, they can do the same program. Now basketball and softball are on the same program. Okay, well, who else? Swimming is also in that boat. Soccer is also in that boat. Rowing is also in that boat. Okay, so now I have 5 teams doing the same program. Maybe I swap out 1 or 2 things for softball, dumbbell bench instead of bar, whatever. Doesn't matter. But you could have your like base program done for like 10. You could write 1 program that would service like 10 teams. Just maybe you run it backwards. Soccer does in season first, then off season, whereas a spring sport would do the opposite. But it's the same thing. And you had to make minor changes here and there. You could. For example, like if men's basketball was an intermediate, they might front squat instead just because of the height factor. But that's an easy swap. That doesn't really change the whole structure of the program. So that's how I got to do it. And that became my programming system. The beginners had the base level beginner program. The intermediates had the base intermediate program. The advanced one had the advanced intermediate program. So it's 3 programs. You could have 100 teams. They're either going to be beginners, intermediates, or advanced. That's it. It doesn't matter. If you want to get more individualized, I just couldn't pull it off with 1 coach and 600 kids. At a different time, different place, maybe individualize more. But I found, you know what? At a certain point, training is general, and you just got to be better at your sport. Go play. I've developed you from a general capacity as much as I could. You're strong, you're powerful, you move well. Go play better than the other team. And I kind of learned that lesson as I went along. It's like, you know what? We can fine-tune the bells and whistles all we want. And I think a lot of strength coaches like to do that because they want to feel more important than maybe they really are. And I realized, you know what? I can only do so much. I'm going to get you as far as I can and then go play. And that's it. And that's the job. So.
Now, you brought up dynamic effort in there, and you talked about, your advanced lifters. When do you start sprinkling that in with your lifters so you're moving, sub-maximal weight at very high speeds for low reps and then building your reps up through sets? When do you decide an athlete or a team is ready to start moving in that direction?
That's a good question. One is going to be competency and movement. So they got to be able to move well and squat to depth, have good control over presses, whatever, hinge well. So they just have to be good lifters in general. I would say this is because I've played around with it quite a bit, and I'll give you some examples of when it didn't work and when it worked well. I have a chart of strength standards. I put that on social media before. It's actually, if you're following me on Instagram, it's pinned on my Instagram. So basically, when the majority of the team, so I had minimum standards, goal standards, and what I call great level standards, but I wasn't worried about those. Those were just for fun. So I found when most of the team could hit the goal standards for relative strength, so it was max to body weight. So like a 2 times body weight squat would be a goal. And then like a 1.7 front squat would be a goal, or 1.5 bench, So that would be a goal. So I noticed most of the team was at or very close. They were close to that point of diminishing returns for strength alone. Up to that point, they just needed to move better, train general, and get stronger. Until they hit that point of diminishing returns, The lowest hanging fruit far and away is going to be getting stronger and generally more powerful and like generally more faster. General ad nauseum until they can hit those standards. Because that's all it is. It's just it's progressive overload and linear periodization for 3 years until they hit a double body weight squat, right? That's all it is. There's no shortcut. There's no fancy tricks. Just get stronger. So when they started getting to those goal numbers, that's when they hit that point of diminishing returns for strength. That's when we know to start shifting the training emphasis to explosive strength speed, rate of force development, because just getting stronger alone wasn't going to help them anymore. So that's when I would bring that stuff in, is when most of the group was at that point. There's always going to be some outliers. There's going to be some that hit it earlier. There's going to be some that didn't quite. But when like 70, 80% of the group was at that level, that's when I would start to introduce that dynamic effort stuff. And I tried doing it sooner. I got a big West Side kick, I'd say my first year or two when I was at Hamilton. Louis Simmons could do no wrong. Like, I slept with the book of methods under my pillow at night. I loved it. So if you go on my Instagram and scroll back a couple of years, every combination of specialty bars and bands and chains, I did it all. I loved it. It worked wonders for me. So I said, all right, this is the best. I got to try this with the kids, right? And I found that it didn't work any better. That beginner athletes, although you do a speed squat to a box, they might be moving the weight faster, but are they really moving the bar with such intent that they're triggering a strength speed effect? And it's like, not really. They didn't. And when I got away from it and I just did general strength training, the results were just as good, if not better, than trying to be fancy with it. Doing speed bench with a kid with 5 pounds on there, like fives on. What are you getting out of that, really? And it's you're getting too far ahead of yourself and realizing that what I thought was the best way to do it in a concurrent conjugate manner worked. It's time and place, right? For an advanced level lifter, it's what they need because they're at that point. But before that, it's making it more complex when it just doesn't need to be, and it doesn't work any better. I'll give you another example. Men's basketball, really good. One of my best, like I said, championship team. Really good culture, fantastic work ethic, one of the best I've ever had. But just being the natural height and the length of the guys, for the most part, they weren't a very strong team. And that's just the hand they were dealt, being longer limbed, long torso. It's just the hand they were dealt. It wasn't an effort thing or anything like that. But I got on my West Side kicks. So we're doing safety bar squat with chains and like speed bench with a team that wasn't at that strength level yet. And what I found doing that more so in season is they actually got weaker. And the guys noticed that they got weaker and they lost the step because they lost strength because I tried to get too fancy too fast. And it was a really good lesson to learn, although it stunk giving them a suboptimal result. It was a valuable lesson to learn of you can't rush the process. And just because it's fancier doesn't mean it's better. In that case, it was worse. If I just kept it simple with trap bar deadlifts and box jumps, it would have actually been better. Because guess what? That's what we did moving forward and we won a championship. Not because of the trap bars and jumps, but just illustrates the point. So I saved the dynamic effort stuff for late in the game when they're at that point of diminishing returns or as they get closer to their game season. So, like, for example, baseball is just another example I could think of. Power sport, guys came in pretty strong, and they really attacked and then got better, but I still kept it on that intermediate program until the end of the fall, and I only started introducing that more dynamic effort stuff late in the fall going into the spring. So I would give it to them like in November. They would do it on their own at home, like 6 weeks, and then we would come back and do like an alternating dynamic effort, heavy effort through the season. So it was really only the last, 4 months of their year I was doing that stuff. The other 8 months was pretty intermediate general stuff. So late in the game or late in the training year of your annual plan is when I would use it, if I used it at all.
Now, you talked in there a little bit, and I think this is probably what most high school coaches probably would lean to, is just a linear periodization. If you have your numbers right and your kids aren't cheating the weight And even if you run a training max like Jim Windler does with the 5-3-1, you're going to keep advancing. And then if they finally do top out, which more than likely they won't, then at that point, like you said, you could add the dynamic effort or whatever it is you want. But it has to be way easier as a coach to program that on a linear timeline, because the kids know, hey, we're putting on 5 extra pounds this week, or we're doing 5 extra reps, whatever the case may be. So I guess you found that was easier in the bigger rooms and you were getting just as much return out of it?
100%. Exactly. Yep.
Now, it's so easy to watch Instagram, watch TikTok. Oh, that exercise is awesome. Look how explosive these kids are. They've really got the edge on us over here because they're doing this. Weeding through all of that stuff just to get your kids stronger. How do coaches kind of navigate all of that stuff?
That's a good question. Frankly, that's why I do what I do on social media. I'm not to toot my own horn or anything, but I think they need somebody to say, look, that stuff is great, but it's not necessary. That's like my whole message on social media. It's like that it all has a time and place, but keep it simple. It's hard, right? Because imposter syndrome sets in really quick. And I remember, when I was a young coach starting out, I would see whatever name and I would oh my God, what is that? I'm such a fraud. I'll give you an example. When I first got back to Bryant as an assistant, I was 23. It's when triphasic was first getting popular. And my head coach, my mentor, asked, have you heard about this triphasic? And I had no idea. I'd never heard of it. So, of course, I said yes because I lied and I was dumb. And I was like, oh, my God, what is triphasic? Did I miss that? Was that on the CSES test? And I'm like, I'm such a fraud. I fooled him into hiring me. And I'm having a conniption at my desk, trying to Google what triphasic was. And I get it. I've been there. So how do you sort through it? It's hard. It's hard. I think you need somebody to tell you, look, keep it simple, or here's how you could sprinkle it in, but keep your 90%, the 90%. I always go back to the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule. So 20% of your efforts drive 80% of your results. In reality, I think it's closer to 90-10. 10% of your efforts drive 90% of your results. So just do that 10, 20% that matters and forget about the rest. But how do you sort through it when you don't have that base of information, that background knowledge? It's hard. You kind of got to have a little bit of a BS sensor and say, is that going to work for us? Probably not. I'm not sure unless you have somebody kind of directing you. It's hard because it's so rampant. It's so rampant out there. It's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, nobody wants to let you see what they did to get there to make the video. It's not all real. It just looks good on a video.
Oh, 100%. I was guilty of that when I was a younger coach. I would see a variation on Instagram, and I would do it with a team just so I could put it on social media. Stupid, incredibly stupid. But I fed into that years ago too. But they didn't see the front squat we did before that. They saw the fancy this or that. But yeah, it's hard not to fall into the trap.
Now, I also heard you talk about this, and I thought this was a pretty unique approach, but reps in reverse for finding training maxes, or even letting kids decide what their 1 rep max is off the work they've done. How are you able to utilize that? Because that seems like a principle that most people wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah, it takes a mature group. So if you tell a high school kid, hey, work off your max. It's yeah, I hit 225 in my friend's garage the other day. I can do that. So it works when you work with a more mature group and a more experienced, you can get away with that more. So our kids that were more experienced do have a pretty good idea of what they could do for a set of 3 to 5. If it's a set of 3, add 7-8% to it, add 5%. Let's say a set of 3 would be 92%. So if you add 5%, you got roughly 97% max there. That's a pretty good training max to work off of. So I was okay. What can you hit for 3? I think I could do 250 for 3. Okay, add 10%, 275. Work off 275. Let's see how it goes. And then you would do your reps in reserve. Okay, let's say we're going to do a set of 6. at 80%. I know 80% is my 8 rep max. So the kid would do a set of 6, and I would ask, how many more could you do? And the answer should be 1 or 2. If it truly is 80%, the answer is going to be I could have done 1 or 2 more reps. If it was a 6 rep max, it wasn't 80%. It's probably closer to 85, but then I would dial it down. I would say, okay, that's close to 80. Let's drop your max down to 265, and you can dial it in pretty quick. Or if they say, I could have done like 4 or 5 more, let's bump your max up. So it was just a way to get started, and then you can dial in over the next week or two and get it there. Because you don't, that's like an ongoing assessment. You don't need to do a max test day or a plus set, although you could. So what I would do with my more advanced teams, when we got up to like heavy sets of 5 or 6, I would say, okay, if your first set, so let's say we're doing 3 sets of 5 at 80%, just a decent load, pretty moderately heavy. After your first set, I would set up a Google sheet. I want you to do 5 reps and tell me how many more you could have done. And then I would get basically a rep max. Okay, I did 300 pounds, I did 5, I could have done 2 more. Okay, that's their 7 rep max. I extrapolate that out. I know 7 reps is about 85%. I would just do the math and then round down. Boom, there's a training max. So when I would go to print out their max charts, I would just use that number. And then we would kind of do it again. Like, okay, work off this number, and then you have the freedom to add if you want. So the next week, let's say we're doing the 3 sets of 5 at like 82%. So, okay, work off this number. You got this training max based on what you did last week, then adjust. If you hit all your reps at 6 and you feel like you could have done more, throw another 5 pounds on there. And that would just give them the leeway. Because it doesn't exactly matter what the percentage on the sheet is, right? If you can do 5 more pounds, do it. Or if it's a little too heavy, take a little weight off. I could give a crap what the number on the bar is. I care that you're executing your reps properly with the right weight. So it just gets you in that small ballpark. That's the important thing. We get too hung up on the exact percentage or the exact rep. Like we talked about earlier, just hit that strain with really good technique with, 1 to 2 reps left in the tank, and you're getting your strain, you're getting your training result. Do that ad nauseum for 2 years and then come back to me. But that's all it is. It just goes back to keeping it simple.
I see where it would take a mature group that had been in the weight room a while, because you're not going to get that out of kids that are just trying to prove to you how much they can lift. Mm-hmm. You got to move into a group that's more focused on the result of the field.
Yeah. So then how would I do it with a younger group? I wouldn't worry so much about training maxes. Either I would assign a number, because I did get a feel that, okay, a freshman should be able to do this. Like a freshman guy should be able to do a 95-pound RDL, and I can start with that. So over time, you'll establish like baselines of what they should do strength-wise. Like a girl who's never lifted before on a dumbbell row should probably start with about 20 pounds. I just know that from experience. So if you're working with a younger population, you'll get those ballpark numbers of where to start. And then just go from there. Like, how'd that feel? That was easy? All right, go up. How was that? Not easy? Okay, let's stay there. And it's the same kind of idea. Just start light. Start with something you know you can do, and then just go up from there. Adjust as you need.
So to get a little bit off the weights and kind of move into a little bit different direction, you were able to create your own business through weights and what you've kind of figured out over the years. Now, setting that up, branding yourself, getting your message out there, building a base that allows you to take off on your own, how'd that kind of work out?
So I was always on Instagram. So I got on Instagram in like 2015 because I thought it was cool. It was like, that's when different strength departments started creating Instagrams for there. And I thought it was pretty cool. And it was like a networking thing. So I was a young coach trying to get my name out there. So I said, okay, if I get on social media, this is the way to do it. And I developed a reputation as like a good squatter, because I've always been a good squatter. And then at Bryant, we had the brand new weight room, and people thought it was cool. So it was like, oh, you guys have this cool weight room, and you do these squat videos, and we would play around with some of the bells and whistles in our own training. So it became entertaining social media content. So we kind of developed a reputation as like an entertaining group in a good way. So I was always on Instagram for that reason. And I got on Twitter during the pandemic because I had time like everybody else, right? So that's when I first got on Twitter, just because I had like nothing else to do, right? Nobody did. And I started just sharing my general opinion on, like, I would see a post and I'm like, retweeted or comment under it, and that's how I got started. And I just realized people seemed to resonate with it, so I just kind of kept up with it. And then I started tweeting about what I do, and just things I saw, and it seemed to resonate with people. Like I can tweet about simplicity and what I do at the small school level, and it seemed to really be helpful to a group of people. And when I found that small group of people was a lot bigger than I thought it was, so I just ran with it. So in branding and marketing, they say develop your niche, find your niche, your target market of it. If you talk about what you do genuinely and you genuinely share what you do on a day-to-day basis, your niche develops naturally. Your niche finds you. I didn't set out to be the small school efficient tri-set guy. That wasn't my goal. I just talked about what I did, and the people that found that helpful came to me. And I just said, okay, this is helpful. Well, let me tell you more about it. And then at a certain point, they started asking you questions. Okay, what would you do in this situation? What would you do in that situation? Tell me more about this. And then it's just answering their questions. And that's basically what my content is at this point. It's common questions that I get or common questions that I see. And so, okay, here's how I would handle that. Here's what I did in the past. Pretty much everything we've talked about to this point. I do it in longer form with emails. I do it with videos. I do it with longer form. And that's really what my ebooks and courses and things are. It's just extrapolations of things we've talked about, just at different lengths and different contexts and different depth. But that's really all it is. It's genuinely sharing what you do, and then when people find it helpful, give them more of that. I mean, that's developing a social media audience 101. Like, if you were to pay me a $5,000 course, there it is. That's how you do it.
Now, that's great. That's all the good side of it. But what about the public relations and the criticism and all the bad side of it? How draining is that?
Honestly, at this point, anybody that gives me nonsense, I just block them. I ignore the nonsense as much as I can. Every once in a while, I'll get roped in, and it's every single time it's why did I respond? Why? I've just gotten used to the idea of either ignore it or just block them and move on. Honestly, to this point, I don't see a lot of that because over time, I've blocked or muted the troublemakers. So when people argue about stuff, I just don't see it, which is great. And so that's a social media tip, especially for Twitter. Anybody who's on there, if you see a common name that keeps popping up and they annoy you, just mute them or block them. And after a while, the troublemakers stop showing up because you don't hear from them anymore. So I really don't see a lot of that. I would get that more when I was first starting out. When I was first starting out tweeting, I would get a lot more challenges. People would a lot more questioning of what I did. And the more I did it, you kind of develop like an authority. And instead of questioning you, they start to say, oh, okay, tell me more. And it's like, okay, this guy has proven he knows what he's talking about. He's not just some guy on a podium, because I've gotten that. I've been called just another guy on a soapbox or whatever. The further along you go, the less you see of it. And the more you clean up your timeline through blocking and muting, the better it gets. But honestly, it's just ignoring it. It's just ignoring it and then moving on. Have a life outside of social media.
Well, I know we've been going for a while. I've got a couple other questions, and I'll let you go about your evening. I know you're on a different time zone than me, so it's getting late out there. But increasing your value wherever you're at. I've heard you talk about that, and I thought that was some amazing content. The money may not always be there, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't stop trying. You should find a way to improve your value to wherever you are and then work from there. How'd you come up with that, I guess, theory, or how were you able to put that into practice?
I think as I went on, I think I may have a different take on that. I think you do your job really well. The biggest part about returning value is being really good at your job within reason. Showing up and doing more low return on investment things just to be there and guarding your desk is not value. So you have to understand what actions have a high impact. So, like, going to every single game is not a high impact. Going to games when you can help develop a relationship, but You don't need to be at every single one. It's not as high an impact as people make it seem. And it's also extremely draining on you. But also being valuable is just other ways you can help. For example, can you help a coach develop their conditioning program? Can you help with nutrition within your lane to some extent? Can you help a kid rehab an injury in conjunction with the athletic trainers? Can you help them work around an existing condition? And I think those things are all tied to being a really competent professional. So you don't need to burn the midnight oil, and you don't need to burn the candle at both ends. You just need to be really good at what you do and consistent. And being able to do that in different avenues proves value. If all you do is just 3 sets of 8, that's not very valuable. You should be replaced by the people you work for, because there's no reason the assistant soccer coach can't learn how to program 3 sets of 8. And I know that because I'm the one that teaches them how to do it. So if you can do more, if you can add your expertise in different ways, that's adding value. Whether it's in the weight room, outside of the weight room, helping with practice design. Another example of that would be our men's lacrosse coaches and I were like this. We were attached to the hip. But they would sit down with me and they'd say, okay, from a training load standpoint, help us design our practice, and when should we lift? When should we have an off day? And we would plan out their whole season. That's another way to add value. That's nothing to do with the weight room. Just, okay, we practice at this time. Should we lift in the morning? Should we lift in the afternoon? And that's another way to use your expertise to help them, to give them a better experience without actually, having to be in the weight room in that sense. So I think there's a sentiment there's a confusion that add value means be there more. You don't necessarily have to be on campus more. You don't necessarily have to do low ROI tasks. You don't need to travel with every single team. That's not valuable. That doesn't add anything. Just because you're there doesn't mean you're gonna, because you can get somebody else to sit on the bus. It's how can you give your expertise to further help people. I think that's a way to put it.
And then I'll hit you with this last question. So setting your ego to the side, you're in a weight room. It's ego driven to a certain extent. I mean, with maturity, obviously, comes a different way to view things. But setting your ego to the side and learning to listen to your athletes and programming to their needs a little bit as far as the workload they're under. How were you able to grow as a coach in that area?
It's your own ego. It's about them. It's not about you. So it's not about what exercises you like. It's not about what you want to get done. It's about what do they need at this point in time and what are the best tools to get it done, which is a crying shame because there are plenty of coaches out there that cannot mentally detach from certain exercises or certain methods, or we have to go 4 days a week. We have to do this. We have to do that. Because that's about me, right? That's what I like. That's what I'm used to. It's not about what's best for them. So first things first, it's about what do they need and what's the best way to apply it, given your situation. It's about, if you want to talk about caring from people you work for and truly giving them the best, it has to be their interest at heart. So it's just a gut check. You have to check your own ego at the door. For them, I think it's a little more of understanding being an adult and being like a professional workman's mindset of sometimes you're going to have to do things you don't want to do. You might not like getting up at 7 a.m. and doing back squats, but you know what? If you want to be good, sometimes that's part of it. Or you might want to do this or that fancy exercise, but you know what? With our logistics, it's just not realistic. You got to understand that there's other ways to get the job done. So I think it's just maturity on both people's parts, both parties' parts, that understand you as the coach, it's what they need and their needs above all else. So start there.
Well, Coach, I appreciate you taking some time to come on. I mean, you didn't really know anything about me. I reached out to you through Instagram, and this worked out. So I think you explained kind of what you do really well, and I had a wonderful conversation. So thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. No, I think this was really applicable to a lot of the people that come to see me. So any small school or tire logistics people, I mean, I don't think there's anything else I could have hit on that sums up everything. So this was I think we talked about a lot of really applicable things, and I don't think there's any stone left unturned about what I do. So no, this is one of the best conversations from an applied standpoint that I've had on these things. So thank you for facilitating.
Well, I appreciate that. I just, you never know. You try to build good questions for guys, and hopefully it feeds into their wheelhouse, and I'm glad it did.
Oh, yeah, me too. You did well.